Hello, and welcome to an episode of Zilog and Moto where that I hope when you finish watching this episode, you know one thing in particular. And that is that there is a special place in the sixth circle of hell that is dedicated to people that think it's a good idea to place large price stickers directly on paper, especially when a durable plastic surface is not only right there, but easier to get to because it's on the outside of the package. Whereas you would have had to have taken the paper out of the protective case, place the sticker on the paper, and then slide it back into the case, where it will then sit for the next 30 or so years with no hope of ever being safely removed to return the package back to its original appearance. Why the sixth circle specifically? Well, if you aren't familiar with Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, I'll give you a hint. The sixth circle is dedicated to heretics. Why do I mention all this? Oh, no reason. I just feel like that maybe there are some benefits to having a classical education when trying to review video games. You know what, let me take a breath and start over a little bit less ranty. Hello, my name is Dave and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the YouTube channel where I have a goal of collecting and reviewing every English language game released for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega, or Mega CD as the case may be, and the 32X. Basically, if I can play it on a Genesis with or without some sort of adapter and be able to read what's on the screen, I'm trying to pick up a copy of it and then not just let it sit and collect dust on a shelf for eons, but actually play and review it for the channel with a deep dive into the game, including a look at the packaging and video footage captured from original hardware whenever possible. Today's game is one of those where the English language caveat is important because this is not a game that you would be familiar with if you were just looking at the United States library of the Master System. Or at least this version of the game anyway, because chances are if you're from North America, you probably are familiar with this particular title just from appearing on either a different console or home computer, or failing that, maybe you happen to see my review of the Genesis version way back in episode 6, when I had no idea what I was doing. Well, okay, let's be real. I think we all know that I still have no idea what I'm doing, but I had even less of an idea of what I was doing back then. I mean, I was trying to record these camera segments on a GoPro for crap's sake. We all have to start somewhere, I guess. Anyway, that game in question is PGA Tour Golf for the Master System. PGA Tour Golf, even though its name has changed over the years between iterations, is probably what most would consider the video game golf series. Although, if you're a fan of the arcades, I suppose I could see the argument for Golden Tee as well. Its legacy is such that even though the series seemed to be dead after the 2015 version, with EA officially relinquishing their rights to produce PGA Tour games in 2018, opening the door for 2K to try their hand at golf, well, like any villain in any horror movie, PGA Tour Golf just couldn't seem to stay dead, and returned earlier this year with the simply named EA Sports PGA Tour. As impressive as it is that the game series has been running for 33 years now, what about this version of the first game that didn't show up until almost 3 years after the Genesis version? And how good could the game possibly be, seeing as how this Master System version and its twin on the Game Gear is the only version of the game available for 8-bit devices? Well, we shall see, but first a look at the package.
And, well, I'm about to get angry all over again. Anyway, this is my copy of PGA Tour Golf for the Master System. And honestly, if you don't look too closely at the inner cover, it's actually not that bad of condition. The outer cover is mostly intact with no scratching and just one mark on the front, and the hang tab is intact at the top of the case. And the Sega seal sticker that was commonly used in Europe on these releases is still present as well. Of course, once you start to look at the inner cover, things go downhill, with the inner cover definitely having wrinkling from some minor moisture damage, and then of course there's the sticker damage that I complained about earlier. Software Plus, you're a bunch of, what's the proper term here? Wankers? Yeah, good enough. Basically, they placed not only a large sticker directly on the inner cover advertising some sort of holiday sale, but then also a smaller price sticker just below it, and what remains here is my attempt to remove the stickers without damaging the cover too much. I could probably get the heat gun out and try to get a little bit more off, but I think I've caused enough trouble. And honestly, it's my fault. Like most PAL games I've gotten for the collection, this came from eBay, and I assumed that the stickers would be on the outside of the package because I'm a sane individual. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. Even though the cover is a bit of a mess, I think I'm good to go ahead and just keep this copy because this is one of those games where the game itself is actually cheaper than the shipping to get it across the pond, and I don't feel like potentially rolling the dice with Hermes again. Getting away from me whining and complaining, I actually like this cover art. It's got that later Master System formatting where the art is shown again on the spine with the title, and the art itself is just a nice clean picture of a golfer doing his thing, replicating the picture that was used on the Game Gear version of the game. Oh, and your eyes don't deceive you, this 8-bit version of the game was a Tengen release and not an Electronic Arts title, even though the EA logo is on the cover. Apparently EA wasn't interested in the 8-bit market in late 1993, early 94, for good reason, but Tengen saw the opportunity in the PGA Tour Golf name brand and licensed the rights to publish the game from EA, while bringing back original PGA Tour Golf developer Sterling Silver Software, or as they were known at that point, Polygames. Flipping over the back, and Tengen is attempting to cover 7 languages with flavor text, and actually it's still large enough to be legible. Just barely anyway. The text does a good job at selling the game, and the screenshots, well, they're pretty verdant. Quality-wise, they're fine, and I do like how they included one of the green reading screens. It's just hard to sell a golf game from screenshots, seeing as how it's not the most action-packed game in the world to begin with. Opening up the box, and you can see the third-party white label cartridge manual, both in the great shape that I was referring to earlier. The manual looks like it's maybe been thumbed through a time or two, but it explains the game well and even has pictures thrown in, something that I wasn't necessarily expecting with it trying to have room to cover the 7 languages from the rear cover. Just don't look too closely at said pictures though, as they were mistakenly taken from the lower resolution Game Gear version, so they don't look quite right. One thing of note that I caught though, that at least I've never noticed in a manual before, check this out. Use this game on as small a television screen as possible, 14 inches or less. Yeah, no, but I guess those CRT nerds that like playing games on old Sony security monitors will be happy about that one. Okay, that's the package for PGA Tour Golf. Let's get to the game, and maybe it'll help me forget this disfigured cover. So I've probably mentioned this before, but I'm not really a golf fan. Partially because watching the game on television is about as exciting as watching paint dry on a wall, going back to put on a second coat, and then watching it dry again. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. Sometimes certain events are structured in a way to make it more entertaining, and some of the courses are definitely more interesting than others. But honestly, golf is like any other sport. If you don't specifically enjoy it, and there's not a player that you take an interest in, it's going to be a hard sell to invest a lot of time in watching it. But that's watching golf. For some reason, I actually quite like playing video game versions of golf. And I guess, truth be told, I don't hate playing real golf, especially the mini version. I'm just not particularly good at driving the ball. Oh, okay, let me be real. I am terrible at driving the ball. Maybe I'd be better if I actually practiced, but the one time that I was physically out on the links, it did not go well. I shot 110 on 9 holes, and somehow ended up losing my shoes. Believe it or not, alcohol was not involved. Why do you ask? I think one of the reasons why I like playing on the virtual links is directly due to the PGA Tour Golf series. Sure, there are other great golf games out there, like the Everybody's Golf, Hot Shots Golf series on Sony consoles, or even the surprisingly fun golf minigames that pop up in the Yakuza series. But for me, I always come back to PGA Tour, most likely because it was the first golf series that I really spent a lot of time on with the Genesis, and those first 2 editions of the game. And that was something that I thought was interesting to look at as I did these reviews, with the original PGA Tour Golf and PGA Tour Golf 2 for the Genesis holding up, and getting 3- and 4-star reviews out of me in episodes 6 and 106 respectively. With that being said, when I first found out that there was a PGA Tour Golf game for the Master System, I was very curious about how the game would, or could, even work on an 8-bit console. If you didn't see episode 6, one of the issues that I have with the game on the Genesis is its reliance on rudimentary 3D graphics to display the holes, and as a result, the flybys to preview the hole tend to run between 1 and 2 frames a second, due to the Genesis trying to do all the rendering purely in software. I think you can see where I'm going with this. If the Genesis was struggling with this mightily with the game, how on earth would it translate to the much less powerful Master System, while also including all the other stuff about the game that made it great, like the multiple available courses? Well, to my surprise, the game has actually made it across mostly intact, with a few unfortunate faults that I'll get to in a minute. Upon booting up the game, you'll see a familiar-looking title screen that is effectively a redrawn version of the title screen from the Genesis version, and then after a few seconds, you'll find yourself in the Pro Shop from that game, just drawn slightly differently. Now, both of these things are clearly an 8-bit version of the original, and of course the Master System version isn't going to be a pixel-for-pixel reimaging of the Genesis version, but immediately it's clear to see that the developers were going to try to do their best to faithfully recreate the game on less powerful hardware, even though they only had half the ROM space on the cartridge to work with the Master System version only weighing in at 2 megabits as opposed to the 4 on the Genesis. In a lot of situations like this, it's pretty common for developers to immediately cut content, and not even try to implement things that were present before, just due to attempting to save on resources. And with a golf game, you would think that perhaps maybe not all of those 4 courses included in the original version would have made it across. However, that is not the case, and instead all 4 of the courses that PGA Tour Golf were known for, Sawgrass, Avenel, the PGA West Stadium course, and the fictional Sterling Shores, which is unfortunately misspelled in the manual as Starling Shores, kind of a big goof considering it was named for the original development house, Sterling Silver Software, are all present and accounted for in this version of the game. Having 4 different courses was a big deal at the time, and even with the Master System version releasing a few years after the Genesis version, it still wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get that much variety in a golf game, no matter what platform it was on, so it's nice to see that they recognized how important it was to include all 4 courses. Just to give you an example, Chi-Chi's Pro Challenge Golf, which was released only about 6 months before in July of 1993, still only had 1 course to play on. Okay, so Polygames managed to cram all of the existing courses into the game and give it a nice title and intro screen, but what is there to do once you decide you want to play? Well, just like in the 16-bit version, you can shoot a full practice round, or go straight to a specific hole on any of the courses that's been giving you trouble. You can also practice your shots at the driving range, or go to the putting green to work on your short game. And finally, just like in the Genesis version, you can take on the field of actual PGA Tour pros with either yourself or up to 3 friends and try to finish in the money on each of the 4 courses. The game even features a battery-backed-up save game function, which was one of my favorite things about the Genesis version, so that you can save your winnings progress and track how you're doing in comparison to all the other pros. It might seem like a small thing, but as I saw last week with RBI Baseball 93, it was certainly not a guarantee to get battery backup even in a Genesis title at the time, much less a Master System game, so to see it here really tells me that they cared about trying to get this right. There is, unfortunately, one major gameplay element that didn't make the transition over, and that is full tournament play. That might sound confusing because I did just say that you can take on a proper field of golfers to try to win prize money, but there's a catch. If you're familiar with professional golf events, you might know that traditionally a golf tournament is a 4-day affair, assuming the golfer in question is good enough to make the cut after the first 2 rounds, which usually means you have to be in the top 50 or so from a scoring perspective to make it to day 3. Unfortunately, on this version of PGA Tour Golf, the tournament mode is simplified, and rather than having to be consistently good over 4 rounds, each tournament is only 1 round. It's not a huge deal, but some of the excitement in golf comes from players having to struggle to make the cut and then come on strong in the end, or players that start out hot and then have to try to stay on top until the end, and the game having battery backup, but only using it to track winnings and not tournament progress, is a bit head-scratching. One of the things that was so alluring about PGA Tour Golf on the Genesis is how well it played. It was relatively simple, and yet it did almost everything well. PGA Tour Golf on the Master System does a decent job of trying to recapture the feel of the Genesis version, and on the surface it probably seems like a completely capable game of golf. But once you actually start to play a few rounds, you notice that some things are either missing or simply broken. The first thing that I ran into when playing is the poor structure behind aiming your shots. You can move your aim left and right a limited amount, and the as the crow flies direction of the pin is shown at the top of the screen, which is somewhat helpful. And there is the overhead view of the hole that you're probably used to, which is shown either before your shot, or it can be pulled up at any time if you feel like you need to take another look. However, that overhead view is missing one crucial thing, and that's the estimated location of where your shot is going, meaning that you're essentially shooting blind, and just having to rely on the distance to the pin and the distance that your club is supposed to get. It doesn't totally break the game, but it does make it much more difficult. The next two things that I ran into are things that I felt like are broken things, and made certain situations simply not fun. Let me pose a question. Perhaps you hit a bad tee or approach shot, and you end up behind a tree in the rough on the side of the course. Well, what do? Well, if it had been the Genesis version, you could have spun your player 90 degrees and chipped onto the fairway, which, while it might have been a literal lateral move, say that 3 times fast, you would have been able to at least set up to properly approach the green with a clean shot. In the Master System version, you can't spin your golfer. You can only aim a certain degree to the left or to the right, and when you're directly behind a tree, no matter how far to the side you aim, you are simply going to hit that tree, and have to continue on in the forest, hoping that there's not another tree behind that one that's in your way. Of course, some people would probably say, well, you shouldn't have hit it in the rough to begin with, and to that I say, screw you. One other huge annoyance that I ran into was Sawgrass, hole number 17. This particular hole is a par 3, which isn't special, but what is special is that it's an island hole, meaning that the green is completely isolated from the driving area except for a small strip of land that connects the green at the rear. So, of course, the concern is that you have to hit the ball just right, so that you don't hit it too far, but that you also hit it hard enough to clear all the water in the front. I'm including a link in the description for a collection of shots in real life on the hole, so you can have an idea of what it actually looks like if you're curious. It's definitely a challenging hole that puts a big emphasis on shot placement, but it's not one that I think is specifically unfair. That is, assuming that you can actually reach the island. For some odd reason, when choosing clubs for this hole, the game wouldn't allow me to choose a club that went beyond the distance to the hole. The problem with that is, the distance to the hole includes rolling distance, meaning that your shot is going to hit long before the actual pin, and in this case, that means going straight into the water. Even with a 10-mile-per-hour wind at my back and utilizing a perfect, complete overswing, I couldn't reach the green. Sure, I could have taken a drop and gotten that much closer, but why should I have to do that? Why, for this one hole, could I not select a club that would have had no problem reaching the green? It's just a bizarre bug and makes me think that no one playtested this hole, which is pretty inexcusable. From a graphics perspective, I had some concerns about how the game was going to handle being on an 8-bit console, as I mentioned earlier. However, the game actually looks and performs pretty well. This is due to the developers cheating and completely removing the 3D engine, but honestly, I can't blame them. And with as poor as it performed on the Genesis to begin with, I almost prefer it this way. The overhead shots of the holes look great, and it's kind of cool to watch the screen be drawn in based on where your ball landed. There is some weirdness with the depth of the background isn't necessarily accurate, and you might think you've hit a bad shot until you see where it draws the updated screen, but this is totally forgivable for it being an 8-bit title that was going to have some limitations. Sound-wise, there's not a ton going on here, and there was simply no way to not have a drop-off because not only is there the hardware difference that you're dealing with, but the sound on the Genesis version was handled by the legendary Rob Hubbard. For the Master System, Polygames was able to get another fairly well-known composer in David Lowe, aka Uncle Art, but unfortunately the game doesn't have a whole lot of music in it to show off his talents. The music that is there is good though, as expected, and the sound effects are good enough to get the job done, but largely forgettable. PGA Tour Golf on the Master System is a frustrating game to rate, and not because it's difficult to give it a score, but because with 2 or 3 tweaks, I fully think that it could have been one of the best sports games on the console, if not the best. And there are things that I love about the game. I really enjoy the live sports presentation that was brought over from the Genesis version, and the fact that it includes battery backup for the prize winnings is something that I was completely not expecting to see. However, the extra difficulty in aiming shots, and the fact that you don't fully have true control over your golfer is a huge problem. As a result, I'm giving PGA Tour Golf for the Master System 2 stars. I've got a feeling by the time that all is said and done, PGA Tour Golf is probably going to end up being the best golf game on the Master System, so golf and Master System fans should definitely check it out, but everyone else is probably safe to pass on it.
Okay, and that was PGA Tour Golf for the Master System. I really wanted to like this game, and to be clear, I don't hate it. It's just not as good as the Genesis version in frustrating ways. Do I think it was an admirable effort? Absolutely, and honestly, I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was, but it just really needed a bit more polish. As it goes though, it's the answer to an odd trivia question, and you can probably stump someone by asking them what Electronic Arts game did Tengen release. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it'll be the second time that I've featured this particular dynamic duo on the channel. However, this game isn't based on a movie. Well, technically the other game wasn't based on a movie either, not really anyway, even though it said it was. Boy, you've got to love the 80s and 90s when companies could release a licensed game and it would have nothing to do with what it was licensed from, to the point of wondering if the developers had even seen the material that the game was supposed to be based on. Anyway, like I said, this next game is a fresh original title, and thankfully it's not a sports game, so it's got that going for it, which is nice. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 206. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.